It was a quiet Friday afternoon in downtown Manhattan. The mosque on 43rd Street was packed with worshippers attending the weekly Jumu'ah prayer. Among them sat Sheikh Hamid, an 82-year-old man with a gentle demeanor and a long white beard. He had been a respected figure in the local Muslim community for decades, known for his kindness and wisdom. No one expected the peace of the moment to be shattered so violently. Suddenly, without warning, a tall man stormed into the prayer hall. He looked agitated, his eyes wild, shouting something incoherent. Before anyone could react, he ran up to Sheikh Hamid and kicked him squarely in the chest. The elderly man fell back, gasping in pain. Worshippers screamed, rushing to help. Some tried to restrain the attacker, while others checked on Sheikh Hamid, who lay stunned but conscious. The assailant was soon identified as David Collins, a 36-year-old war veteran. Police were called, and David was arrested on the spot. Many in the mosque were still in shock. How could such a thing happen in a place of peace and worship? But the real shock was yet to come. A tourist had recorded the entire incident on their phone, and within hours, the video would explode across the internet. The video was only 14 seconds long, but it shook millions. It showed the moment David stormed in, the forceful kick, and Sheikh Hamid collapsing. The footage spread across social media platforms like wildfire. Influencers, journalists, and even celebrities commented, expressing outrage and disbelief. Hashtag Sheikh Hamid and hashtag Hate in America trended worldwide. News outlets picked it up quickly. Some framed it as a tragic result of rising Islamophobia, while a few tried to justify the attacker's actions by highlighting his mental health issues and troubled past. Still, the general public saw it for what it was, a hate crime against an innocent old man. The mosque received thousands of messages of support, flowers, and handwritten notes from people of all faiths. The viral clip ignited debates on live television. Was America failing to protect its minority communities? Were media and politicians partially responsible for fueling hate? A Jewish American journalist, Rachel Stein, was particularly moved. She tweeted, "If this doesn't wake us up, what will?" and decided to take her camera and curiosity to the source. The next few days were a blur of interviews, opinion pieces, and emotional reactions. Major news stations camped outside the mosque. The imam was interviewed repeatedly, always calm but visibly heartbroken. Community leaders from churches, synagogues, and temples visited the mosque in a show of unity. The city mayor condemned the attack, calling it a disgrace to New York's values. But not everyone reacted with sympathy. Far-right commentators tried to spin the narrative, saying mosques were breeding grounds for hate, despite the obvious contradiction. Some conservative platforms questioned the video's authenticity. Others called it exaggerated or staged. This only added fuel to the fire, pushing even more people to investigate the truth for themselves. Rachel, now deeply invested, spent hours interviewing worshippers and residents around the mosque. She found something unexpected, a community full of warmth, laughter, and humanity. Many of them had known Sheikh Hamid for years. She began to see the stark contrast between the stereotype and the reality. That's when she knew this story was bigger than a single incident. Rachel's coverage took a different tone from most journalists. She wasn't chasing outrage. She was chasing understanding. Her videos didn't just show the pain of the attack, but the resilience of the Muslim community. One video, showing a group of Muslim teenagers helping homeless people in the neighborhood, went viral for all the right reasons. She met Sheikh Hamid in his hospital room, where he was recovering. Despite the bruises on his face, he smiled warmly. "Don't blame him," he told Rachel. "He must have a pain greater than mine." Rachel was stunned. The compassion in his eyes was real. She asked if she could record him. He agreed, and what he said next would shake the nation. "We don't respond to hate with hate. We respond with peace." Millions watched that clip. People cried, commented, and shared it with messages of solidarity. Churches and synagogues invited imams to speak. Public schools discussed Islam openly for the first time. Rachel realized she had accidentally started a movement not of anger, but of unity, sparked by a man who had every reason to hate and chose not to. Rachel returned to the mosque, this time not as a journalist, but as a friend. She was greeted with smiles and hugs. She joined the community for a shared meal, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside women in colorful hijabs, laughing and asking questions. The more she saw, the more she realized how much she didn't know about Islam or Muslims. One Friday, she attended Jumu'ah prayer again. This time, she sat at the back, listening to the sermon. The imam spoke about forgiveness, compassion, and how faith is tested through hardship. Rachel had tears in her eyes. Everything she had heard in the media about Islam was being disproven in front of her. There was no hate here, only healing. After the prayer, a young girl named Amira gave Rachel a Quran in English. "I think you'll like this," she said shyly. Rachel held it close, unsure of how to feel. All she knew was that something inside her had shifted, and it had only just begun. A week after the attack, David Collins was brought before the court. The courtroom was tense, filled with media, community members, and even interfaith leaders. David stood pale and visibly shaken. When asked to speak, he surprised everyone by breaking down in tears. "I don't know what came over me," he said. "I was hurting, angry at the world. But what I did to that old man was unforgivable." Despite the public anger toward him, David's words struck a chord with some. He spoke of his PTSD from war, his failed marriage, and the loneliness that haunted him every night. "I was poisoned by fear. I saw enemies where there were none." His attorney revealed that David had started therapy and requested to meet Sheikh Ahmed, not for the cameras, but for closure. The judge allowed a private meeting under strict supervision. When David entered the room and saw Sheikh Ahmed sitting calmly in a wheelchair, he knelt. "I'm sorry," he whispered. To his shock, Sheikh Ahmed reached out and took his hand. "May God heal your heart," he said softly. That simple act of forgiveness stunned not just David, but the entire nation when the story was made public. News of Sheikh Hamid's forgiveness spread faster than the original attack video. Talk shows debated it. Some admired his compassion. Others questioned how someone could forgive such violence. But Sheikh Ahmed remained steadfast. "Forgiveness is not weakness," he said in an interview. "It's the strongest thing a person can do." His words inspired millions. Teachers played clips of his speech in classrooms. Activists quoted him. Even inmates in prisons wrote letters, thanking him for showing that people could change. His face became a symbol of spiritual strength. And while many still demanded justice, few could ignore the depth of character in a man who turned hate into hope. Meanwhile, Rachel released a short documentary titled The Forgiver. It featured interviews with those who knew Sheikh Ahmed, clips of his public forgiveness, and reflections from David himself. The documentary hit 10 million views in under 3 days. But more importantly, it sparked something deeper, curiosity about the faith that taught such grace. As the video of the forgiveness in Rachel's documentary continued to trend, America found itself having uncomfortable but necessary conversations. Podcasts, YouTube shows, and news panels began inviting imams, Muslim scholars, and everyday Muslims to explain the core values of Islam. The topics range from what is jihad really to the beauty of prayer in Islam. Public libraries saw a spike in people checking out books about Islam. Some bookstores reported the English Quran becoming a top seller. Universities added panels on Islamophobia and religious tolerance. Even the Department of Education approved a special week for interfaith education in high schools. But it wasn't just institutions changing, it was people. Rachel received thousands of emails from Americans thanking her. One read, "I never thought I'd say this, but I walked into a mosque today just to ask questions. I was welcomed with tea and kindness. Everything I thought I knew was wrong." The tide was turning. Rachel kept returning to the mosque, no longer with a camera, but with a notebook and an open heart. She started fasting during Ramadan to better understand the experience. It wasn't easy, especially without coffee, but each day brought her a new sense of clarity. She found herself enjoying the calmness of prayer, the focus on inner peace. One night during Tarawih prayers, Rachel felt something she couldn't explain, a stillness, a connection. Later that evening, She sat quietly with Amira and whispered, "What if I actually believe this?" Amira just smiled. "Then maybe you always did. You just didn't know the name for it." Rachel wept quietly that night, not from fear, but from something deeper, a sense of returning home. A few days later, inside a small prayer room surrounded by her new friends, Rachel said the Shahada. "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." The moment was simple, but powerful. She didn't post about it immediately. It was hers, personal. But when she finally did, the response was overwhelming: support, curiosity, and yes, some hate too. But Rachel was ready. Rachel's story inspired more than just admiration. It encouraged action. Mosques across the country began hosting open mosque days. Curious Americans lined up, eager to learn, to ask, to listen. Some came out of anger or doubt, but left with changed hearts. Within a month, hundreds had taken their Shahada. One story stood out. A retired Marine who had once served in Iraq walked into a mosque in Arizona. "I came here thinking I was facing my enemy," he said. "Instead, I found my brothers." His emotional conversion was live-streamed and shared by veterans groups around the world. It opened doors no one expected. By the end of that month, the numbers had become undeniable. Over 100,000 Americans of every race, background, and political belief had officially converted to Islam. It wasn't from force. It wasn't from pressure. It was from truth, compassion, and something they never thought they'd find in a place they once misunderstood: peace. With a rising number of conversions, backlash was inevitable. Several fringe media outlets claimed America was under silent invasion. Conspiracy theories flooded the internet. A few mosques were vandalized, and Muslims once again found themselves targets of suspicion. Rachel received death threats. But this time, something had changed. Americans stood up for Muslims. At a rally in Chicago where protesters tried to burn Qurans, a group of Christian pastors formed a human shield around Muslim attendees. One of them, Pastor Jeremy Collins, shouted into a megaphone, "If Jesus walked the earth today, he'd be standing with the oppressed." His bold defense went viral. And surprisingly, many began to explore the shared values between the two faiths. Despite the tension, interfaith unity grew stronger. Churches opened their halls to Muslim prayer groups whose mosques had been damaged. Jewish communities joined hands with Muslim neighbors during Ramadan. What was meant to divide united. The fearsome noise of hate was being drowned by something louder: compassion. After months of deep reflection and therapy, David Collins made a quiet visit to the mosque. He sat in the back, unrecognized at first. Sheikh Ahmed, now fully recovered, noticed him and walked over. "You came," he said warmly. David nodded. "I didn't come to be seen. I came to understand what you forgave me for." Over the weeks that followed, David studied Islam quietly, without fanfare. He joined study circles, listened more than he spoke, and fasted during the last week of Ramadan. One evening, he found himself sitting alone in the prayer hall, whispering to God for the first time in years. It was there, in silence, that something within him finally broke and was rebuilt. On the final night of Ramadan, surrounded by the very people he once feared, David recited the Shahada. There were tears, applause, and stunned silence. The news stunned the nation again. But more than anything, it became the symbol of redemption that people didn't know they needed to see. Following Rachel and David's stories, mainstream media had no choice but to cover the movement more seriously. Morning shows ran segments like, "Why are Americans choosing Islam?" The Quran became a bestseller on Amazon. Google searches for "how to convert to Islam" skyrocketed. Islam wasn't just surviving in America, it was thriving. People in rural towns, urban neighborhoods, Ivy League universities, and military bases began taking interest. Entire families came to mosques. In one incredible story, a church in North Carolina decided to attend a Friday prayer together, led by their pastor who simply said, "We're here to listen." That Friday became known as the Friday of Listening. By the end of that summer, over 1.5 million Americans had taken the Shahada. Not all became devout overnight. Some struggled, some questioned. But their hearts had turned, and America was shifting, not into an Islamic state, but into a society where truth had shattered prejudice and light had drowned out ignorance. In Harlem, New York, a small mosque known only to locals began receiving visitors from around the world. Why? Because that was the place where Sheikh Hamad had been attacked. But more than that, it had become a symbol of something miraculous. The very place of pain had become a fountain of healing. Tourists from Europe, South America, and even Asia came to sit in the very spot where the old man had once fallen. People touched the mosque's floor as if it held something sacred. Artists painted murals of Sheikh Hamad and David embracing. Poets wrote verses titled, "Where Hate Died." Harlem, once known for struggle, now became known for spiritual rebirth. The city council officially renamed the block Path of Peace Way. At the ceremony, Sheikh Hamad, now walking again without aid, stood and said, "We didn't ask for this miracle, but maybe America needed it." The crowd, filled with tears and faith, erupted into applause that echoed down the avenue. Rachel declined multiple million-dollar offers from media giants to sell the rights to her story. Instead, she launched a nonprofit called Clearlight, dedicated to promoting truth, interfaith dialogue, and spiritual literacy. "My story isn't for profit," she said. "It's for purpose." Clearlight began creating educational videos, podcasts, and even children's books. Her YouTube series, Ask a Muslim Anything, gained over 5 million subscribers. But Rachel didn't stop there. She started hosting retreats where people from all backgrounds could unplug, learn, and ask questions. Sometimes, she said, you just need space to breathe and listen. Her quiet leadership inspired thousands to question, explore, and ultimately transform. Rachel often returned to that mosque in Harlem, sitting quietly in the back. One afternoon, a young girl asked, "Are you the lady who made that video?" Rachel smiled. "Yes," she replied. "But more importantly, I'm a Muslim now, just like you." And in that little girl's eyes, Rachel saw what she had once searched for her whole life: peace. The U.S. president, under growing pressure, addressed the nation regarding the massive shift in religious dynamics. "We are witnessing a spiritual awakening unlike anything in our recent history," she said in a live broadcast. "And whether you're Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or of no faith at all, what matters is that we stay united under the principles of freedom, dignity, and mutual respect." Her speech was met with mixed reactions. While some praised her balanced tone, others accused her of pandering to Islam. Conservative commentators erupted. But her administration quietly began funding interfaith programs and expanding protections for religious minorities. Behind the scenes, she met with Sheikh Hamad and Rachel, both of whom urged her not to politicize the movement, but to let it grow authentically. Soon, she signed a new executive order, the Interfaith Harmony Act, ensuring federal grants to organizations promoting dialogue and peace. This marked the first time in U.S. history where Islam was not just protected, but proactively embraced in public policy. It sent a clear message. Islam wasn't infiltrating America, it was becoming a part of its evolving soul. Hollywood had been quiet, until now. A Muslim screenwriter named Kareem Malik pitched a film called The Forgiven, based on David and Sheikh Hamad. Studio execs hesitated at first, fearing controversy. But when they saw early clips of the Harlem block turn sanctuary, they knew they had something powerful. The film was greenlit. Big-name actors began calling Kareem, eager to be involved. But Kareem insisted on authenticity, Muslim actors in Muslim roles, real Arabic used in the dialogue, and consultation with scholars. The trailer dropped online and exploded in views. One act of hate, one nation transformed. It became the most anticipated film of the decade. When The Forgiven premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, it received a 10-minute standing ovation. Critics called it the film America didn't know it needed. More than entertainment, it became a cultural reset, introducing Islamic virtues like patience, forgiveness, and mercy into mainstream consciousness. It made people cry, reflect, and for some it made them believe. Not all who converted did so publicly. In small towns and conservative households, quiet conversions were happening. a high school football coach in Texas, a retired Marine in Arizona, a librarian in Vermont. All of them took Shida in secret. Fear of backlash kept them from announcing, but nothing could stop the change inside them. They formed online communities, anonymous Zoom halakas, and secret support groups. Slowly, they began revealing their faith through actions, kindness, honesty, and new habits. A waitress in Kansas started wearing a subtle bracelet with the name Allah on it. Her co-workers noticed a peace in her they couldn't explain. One by one, they emerged from the shadows. At a massive gathering in Chicago, over 1,000 hidden Muslims stepped forward on stage. "We're not hiding anymore," one man said into the mic. The crowd chanted, "Allahu Akbar." And for the first time, the world saw just how far the ripples of that one moment in New York had spread. Months after recovering, Sheikh Hamid returned to Mecca for pilgrimage. News of his journey spread, and when he arrived at the Grand Mosque, pilgrims from across the world recognized him. Some wept, others asked for du'as. The man who had once been kicked in a corner of Harlem was now embraced in the heart of Islam. During Tawaf, he reflected on the journey. One man's hatred led to millions discovering Islam. "Allah truly works in ways we can't imagine," he whispered. Tears rolled down his cheeks. As he stood before the Kaaba, he prayed not for revenge, but for mercy, especially for those who still hated what they didn't understand. Upon returning to the U.S., he was welcomed like a national hero. Schools invited him to speak. Universities studied his forgiveness as part of their ethics programs. Sheikh Hamid, once a quiet elder, had become a voice for a generation, not through speeches or protests, but through character, patience, and one unforgettable act of grace. One cool evening in New York, Rachel, David, Sheikh Hamid, and Kareem Malik were invited to a special interfaith panel at Madison Square Garden. The arena was packed. Christians, Muslims, Jews, atheists, all came not to debate, but to reflect. The theme was simple: what happens when one act changes everything? Each spoke with emotion. David recounted his inner darkness, and the day light broke in. Rachel talked about the video she almost didn't upload. Sheikh Hamid simply said, "I forgave because Islam teaches me to, not for attention, but because hate doesn't deserve a permanent home in my heart." The crowd gave a standing ovation. At the end, they all embraced. Cameras flashed. But more importantly, hearts opened. That night, another 1,000 Americans took the Shida right there on the stage. It was no longer a ripple. It was a wave. And it was just beginning. In a quiet suburb of Pennsylvania, an old man sat on his worn-out recliner, watching the news clips of the Madison Square Garden event. His face was stoic, but his hands trembled slightly. It was him, the man who had kicked Sheikh Hamid that day. No one knew his name. He had vanished from the public eye, buried under a wave of public backlash and shame. But something inside him had been unraveling. Day after day, he watched Islam's growth not with anger, but confusion and regret. He had expected chaos after his act. Instead, he saw peace, forgiveness, love. The video of Sheikh Hamid forgiving him, even when his name was never spoken, played on loop in his heart. Guilt turned into curiosity. Curiosity turned into quiet learning. One afternoon, he walked into a small local mosque during a Friday prayer. His presence drew glances. He sat at the back, head bowed. After the prayer, he approached the imam and said softly, "I was the one who hurt him." The room went silent. Then the imam embraced him. "You hurt one man," he whispered, "but Allah used it to heal millions, including maybe you." That day, he took his Shida. Years passed. Islam had not overtaken America. It had integrated, coexisted, enriched. Schools taught about Ramadan alongside Christmas and Hanukkah. Public libraries carried Qurans next to Bibles. The term American Muslim no longer raised eyebrows. It sparked conversations. A new generation of Muslims grew up proud, visible, and fully at home. Rachel became a well-known journalist and began a non-profit media platform called Light Unseen, spotlighting stories of spiritual awakening from all backgrounds. Kareem's film won an Oscar, and he used his speech to thank not Hollywood, but the quiet man who knelt to pray after being kicked to the ground. His words brought tears and thunderous applause. Sheikh Ahmed, older now, sat at a park bench in Harlem watching young kids play. A boy wearing a kufi ran up to him and said, "I saw you in my school textbook. You're the reason my dad became Muslim." Hamid smiled and pulled the boy close. "No," he whispered, "Allah is the reason. I was just part of the plan." The boy didn't fully understand, but one day he would. On the 20th anniversary of the incident, a massive gathering was held at that same Harlem mosque. People from all over the world came, Muslim, Christian, Jew, Hindu, agnostic. There were no protests, no slogans, just people, remembering, reflecting, praying, forgiving, hoping. David stood quietly near the back, watching families eat together under colorful tents. He had not only converted, but become a community counselor, helping others deal with hate, addiction, and trauma. He hadn't just healed his heart. He had helped others find theirs. When he saw Sheikh Ahmed arrive, they hugged tightly. Two men, once enemies, now bound by fate. That night, under the stars, Sheikh Ahmed gave one final speech. "Don't remember me," he said. "Remember why this happened. Because when hatred is met with mercy, Allah turns tragedy into light. And that light lives in you now." The crowd stood in silence. No fireworks, no music, just peace. A peace that had begun with one hateful act and ended in love. Thanks you.